As the Easter weekend looms, religious leaders are complaining about the updated COVID-19 regulations. Congregants will be required to produce a negative COVID-19 test or proof of vaccination, and venues are still subject to a 50% capacity restriction. Religious leaders complain that these restrictions are too cumbersome and the government has been ignoring their concerns. Now, the International Federation of Christian Churches, that's the IFCC, held a briefing earlier, and who was there? My colleague, that's reporter Nqobile Madlala, following these developments. She's back with us here. She's in the studio now with me. Nqobile, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. Well, the church says it seems like they are being targeted. Tell us more.
Well, Britan, essentially they're saying that they've been trying to voice out their concerns to the government, that they feel that this is discriminatory, that some of their people may not be able to essentially provide what is expected, but they can still stick to the regulations. But it seems like the government is not listening to their concerns, but instead what they want to do is, and you'll remember when we were speaking to Akuma as well, they were saying that they feel that the government has certain things that they have put forward and they just expect them to comply. So it doesn't matter how many times they say that they don't feel this is the right way, or they don't feel that this is good for their congregants. This is the only way, and or else it's the highway at this point. So they're saying that essentially what they're looking at government as basically telling them what to do and essentially not listening to the concerns, because at the end of the day this is people's lives and these are people that need to come to Easter. But unfortunately, they still need to comply, despite some saying that they may not be able to vaccinate. They say there are a lot of conditions that go with that. Some people may have some issues relating to health, but all of that is not something that the government is willing to listen to, except just to say that they want this, this mandate, and therefore they're calling it a vaccine mandate, and they're saying that they're going against it. But let's listen in.
This treatment by our government leaves very much to be desired. Most church and religious leaders feel targeted by our government, and we couldn't agree more. The latest announcement on the vaccine mandate is a case in point. During the last 25 months, some of our pastors, particularly in the rural and township areas, appealed for help from our president and the government, and nobody came to their rescue. However, other sectors were assisted and continue to be assisted so that they can operate. It is clear from where we are sitting that our government seems not to have respect for the religious sector, because if they did, they would have never announced the vaccine mandate in a way it was done, knowing very well how sensitive this matter is, because it's about people's faith and people's belief.
Beyond it being about people's faith and people's beliefs, and Nqobile, I understand some of the religious leaders say this mandate that the government is imposing on the church is seen as an injustice to women. How so?
Well, but Daniel, remember that under COVID we had a lot of stats that were showing that women were being abused. So GBV, I mean, we're in a country that is currently struggling against femicide and gender-based violence. And they're saying that there are women that go to church because they need that assistance, because they need that support. But in this case, the issue here is that some of these women may not have vaccinated or may not even have a certain amount of money to go get that test done. And as a result, they would be, in a way, just excluded from church. And this is where they find healing.
It's a huge disadvantage in a way.
Exactly, Britan. And so now what they're saying is that this means that it's not only now discriminating against people, but it's discriminating against women specifically that go to church to find healing, to get help from counseling. We know churches do a whole lot of counseling and assisting. They're talking about marriages, all sort of things that have happened. So now they're saying that they feel that it's now targeting women, because over 60% of people that go to church are female. But let's listen in now.
As women, we constitute about 68% of membership of the church. And we are saying that an injustice to the church is an injustice to women. That is where we find our solace. That is where we find healing. You know, church is our place of comfort. When you tamper with the church, you are tampering with the very core of our being. And we take serious exception to that. And I want to take it further and say that it's not just a constitutional issue, but it is a moral issue. It's a moral issue. 3 days before Good Friday, I have no doubt in my mind that the manner in which the government has conducted itself and has treated the church, if Jesus was alive on this day, they would have been at the helm of crucifying him. The very people that fought against the Segregation Act of 1950, the Group Areas Act, are the very people that are dividing people. How ironic.
And finally, Nqobile, was the church or leadership consulted before any of these decisions were made? What did they tell you?
Well, interestingly, Dan, what they're saying is that, yes, there were some conversations that they had with government. But what they're saying is that they were merely brought into a meeting and they were told. And they didn't have an option to object. And even if they did object, none of their objections were taken into account. And so as a result, they're finding themselves where they're being told what to do. And now going forward, this is what they're supposed to implement, even though they still have a lot of objections around it. So they're saying now, though, that this is an appeal to government. They're trying to appeal to government to say, listen to us. Going forward, this is what we would like to do, and can they sit at a table and have a conversation? But let's listen in again.
No one handles a weighty matter like people's religion in the way our government did. In his address to the nation, the president mentioned that he had consulted with some religious leaders, which the IFCC has been part of. But those consultations were merely information sessions, because no matter what we say, propose or object to, government always seems to do what it wants. We don't regard those meetings as consultations at all. And what we consider even worse is that we never received any feedback from the government. The FCC leadership strongly opposes this requirement. We will not support it in any way, shape or form, and we're not in agreement with it. It seems to be irrational, discriminatory, it's unjust, it's unfair. We cannot be expected to comply with it.
That's Reverend Musa Sonove of the International Federation of Christian Churches.